My son called me and said, "We're leaving tomorrow. The beach house you cherished all your life, I've sold it. Goodbye." I replied, "But you forgot one thing." He asked, "What are you talking about, Mom?" I burst out laughing, because the house he sold was actually, "I'm glad you're here." If you're watching this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know where you're listening from. The white lights at Northwestern Medicine made everything look clean and distant, like the surface of steel. I sat amid the smell of disinfectant, staring at the empty chair beside me, realizing I felt older and more out of place than anyone else in the room. My name is Evelyn Carter, 71 years old. On the screen in front of me, patient names flickered on and off. Some people were helped in by others, some pushed in wheelchairs, some followed by a small grandchild clutching a milk box. I pulled the wool scarf tighter around my neck, the one Robert, my husband, gave me years ago, holding it as if it were a piece of driftwood in cold water. My phone was still open on recent calls, a string of red missed calls to Michael, my son. No reply. I had called all last night and again this morning. A nurse passed by, then stopped. "Mrs. Carter, is anyone here with you?" "I came on my own," I answered, trying to sound normal. She nodded and walked away. The soft squeak of her rubber soles against the tile reminded me of Robert's footsteps in the kitchen on winter mornings. Short, steady. He's gone now. I've said those words many times, but each time feels like another stone dropped into my coat pocket. My name appeared on the screen. The exam room door opened. The internist shook my hand and asked a few routine questions about sleep, meals, blood pressure. I answered simply, without complaint. He checked my pulse again, scheduled a follow-up. "Your blood pressure spikes occasionally. Keep an eye on it. And if you can, bring a family member next time, just for peace of mind." He wrote a note on my appointment slip, underlining it. "Remember to bring a relative if possible." I folded the paper with perfect precision, tucking it into my wallet as if I were putting away a needle to keep it from pricking my hand. Still, my eyes drifted toward the door. No one in a gray coat walked in. No hurried apology from Michael for being late. I thanked the doctor, stood, and left. The hallway stretched long, the lights above breathing softly like a machine. When I pushed through the exit to the parking lot, the wind from Lake Michigan struck my face head-on, and dry leaves curled around my ankles like a thin cat. I opened the car door, sat down, loosened my scarf. The phone suddenly buzzed. It was Michael. I answered before the first ring had even finished. His voice was flat, even. "Mom, quick update. I sold the house in South Haven and Dad's Ford F-150. We need the money for our trip to Europe. I'll wire you 30%. I'm at security now. Can't talk longer. Bye." "Michael." I barely managed to press the word between two heartbeats before the line cut off. The screen went dark, reflecting a wrinkled face and tired eyes, mine split by a faint crack of light. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. The seatback felt cold through my coat. In my mind, I saw Robert driving the F-150 along the lakeshore road, clear as a silent film window rolled down, his laugh carried by the wind. "This breeze'll wake you right up." Then Michael as a boy, running across the South Haven sand, tossing a ball too high, turning back to shout, "Mom!" All of it fell away, snuffed out like someone pressed a switch. My son had left me to chase love. He had thrown away everything I worked for, everything his father built. He sold the last traces of Robert's life as if they meant nothing. How could he? The hollowness spread through me like cold water. I took a slow breath. The sterile scent in my nose gave way to the old leather of the car seat. My fingers found the frayed edge of the scarf. I didn't cry. Tears right now would only fog the windshield and solve nothing. Instead, another memory surfaced sharp, complete. One evening, Robert stood by the wooden dresser in our bedroom, pulled a brown envelope from the bottom drawer, and set it on the vanity. He looked straight at me. "If you ever really need it," he said, "then open it." When I started the engine, it came alive calmly. I drove out of the lot and merged into the morning traffic. The lights on the street changed colors: red, then green, green, then yellow. Everything moved on as usual, except my chest. I didn't stop by the grocery store like I always did. I drove straight to Naperville, parked in front of the house, locked the door behind me, walked through the living room, past the kitchen. My steps counted 4 beats across the carpet, then turned left into the bedroom. The room was unchanged. The wedding photo above the bed, the seashell Michael picked up as a child still resting on the shelf. I pulled open the bottom drawer, my fingers brushing the edge of the brown envelope. It was there waiting, as if deliberately placed to be found. I carried it to the table, sat down, switched on the lamp. The soft yellow light spread a small, private circle across the room. My hands stopped trembling. I held them steady, like gripping a steering wheel in the wind. I laid the envelope flat. My name, Evelyn, was written in Robert's familiar fountain pen, slightly tilted to the right, the final stroke firm, just as he signed every bill. I ran my fingers over the edge of the paper, feeling the worn fibers brush my skin. Beneath the layer of yellowed glue was something I needed more than a late apology. Inside that envelope lay the choice that would decide whether I could still stand tall or not. I pressed the envelope tight between my palms, gazed at Robert's handwriting under the lamplight, and heard his voice echo clearly in my mind. Only open it if you truly need to. And this morning, I knew I'd finally reached that point. I peeled open the seal like undoing an old stitch. The paper crackled against my fingernail. Inside the envelope were a folded letter and a stack of documents stamped with a deep red notary seal. The dark wooden floor reflected the warm glow of the lamp. The wedding photo by the nightstand caught a sliver of light on Robert's face. He was smiling just as he had the day I said yes to him by the lake, one June afternoon. I placed the letter on my palm and took a slow breath to steady my hands. Evelyn. The first line read, written in fountain pen. The black ink had dried, but it was still sharp. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer standing beside you. I've done it another way. My eyes moved down the page, following the neat, slanted lines, his handwriting, even and deliberate, like his footsteps. Robert wrote plainly, without ornament. For the past 20 years, he had quietly built a company called Harbor Light Holdings, LLC. The company owned 6 properties stretching from the suburbs to downtown, including a 20-story building in West Loop, and held shares in 3 other companies. All of it is under your control, he wrote. Not because I lack trust, but because I trusted you completely. I want you to stand firm without ever having to ask anyone's permission. I paused, listening to the steady ticks of the wall clock. Everything in the letter was specific addresses, file numbers, account details, contact names, and a single sentence about Michael. If our son loses his compass, don't hold his hand through the fog. Let him stumble. Let him touch the stones himself. Only then will he understand the ground beneath him. I read that line again, then carefully folded the letter along its original creases and set it aside to open the notarized documents. There was no room for sentimentality in the paperwork company charter, transfer records, asset statements. Every page bore Robert's signature, a notary stamp, and the name of the authorized representative, Peterson. The confidentiality clause was double underlined. The right to act on behalf of the sole shareholder was clearly written, Evelyn Carter. I put on my reading glasses, scanning each section. The South Haven house was registered under the company, not as a personal property. The West Loop building was managed through an intermediary, but ultimate control rested with Harbor Light Holdings, LLC. The shares in the 3 companies listed ownership percentages and dividend schedules. The legal path had already been laid out. I only had to step onto it. I set the stack of papers down, resting my palm on the words Harbor Light, as if testing the weight of the ink. Then I reached for my phone and dialed Peterson's number, the one saved since Robert's funeral, though I had never called. He answered on the second ring. Peterson speaking. This is Evelyn Carter, I said slowly, clearly. Robert left me some documents concerning Harbor Light Holdings, LLC. I want to meet with you in person tomorrow morning. And I need everything handled in complete confidence. A brief pause. Then his voice lowered. I have his contingency authorization. 9 a.m., my office. I'll make the arrangements. Bring all the documents with you. I'll be there. I hung up, setting the phone face down on the table, the soft tap of plastic on wood sounding like the end of a sentence. I opened a fabric-bound notebook from the drawer, its first page still smelling faintly of glue. With a ballpoint pen, I wrote the title, Plan. Beneath it, 3 neat lines. Cancel the sale of the South Haven house. Reclaim the F-150. Take direct control of the West Loop building. I lingered over the final period, then added a small sticky note on the edge of the page. Keep identity confidential. Avoid direct confrontation with Michael. I reminded myself, I am not a judge. I am a mother who has endured enough silence. I slipped Robert's letter into the notebook, pressing it between the pages like a spine. The wedding photo still stood beside the lamp, and the man in it smiled his quiet, knowing smile. All right, Robert, I whispered. I understand what you wanted. I'll carry out your wishes. I gathered the documents into a sturdy folder, arranged them in order: letter, charter, asset list, transfer papers, contact directory. Then I stood, pulled a heavy coat from the closet, and tested the zipper. The mirror reflected me hair silver and tied back neatly, the wool scarf draped over my shoulders. No makeup, no pretense. I wasn't going to war, I was going to a meeting. Before turning off the light, my eyes fell on the photo of Michael as a boy standing on the South Haven beach, holding a blue kite, squinting against the Sunday. I could still feel the small warmth of his hand gripping mine as we ran from the edge of the waves. It had been so long since I'd held that hand. The look in his eyes then was nothing like the one I'd heard in his voice this morning. I closed my eyes and spoke the words silently but clearly in my mind. You'll learn this lesson, my son. I switched off the lamp. The room went dark, leaving only a thin line of hallway light seeping through the door. I carried the folder to the dining table and placed it in my handbag so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. Somewhere across the city, Michael was probably counting down the hours to his flight, and I, counting down the steps to my 9 o'clock meeting. I returned to bed, pulled the blanket up to my chest, and listened to the sound of the traffic fading outside. No tears. I took a deep breath, letting it steady. From this moment on, I had to be strong. Everything was ready. All that was left was to act. I arrived at Peterson's office 10 minutes early. His window looked straight out onto the street, thick glass reflecting a brisk, wide-awake Chicago morning. The shelves were lined with dark-colored case files, and a whiteboard beside them was crammed with court schedules, marked in blue and red ink. Peterson walked in, pulled out a chair, and opened a black leather notebook. Let's start with South Haven, he said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. The transaction originated from someone without the legal right to sell. Harbor Light Holdings, LLC, is the rightful owner. There's solid ground here to void the sale. I nodded, glancing at the underlined notes. He continued. As for the West Loop building, it's currently managed through a trust per Robert's prior instructions. I recommend shifting to direct corporate management under your authority. You'll be the sole signatory. That will tighten the process and separate any of Michael's personal dealings from the assets. Can we do it today? I asked. If you sign the management authorization and open an operational account, we can issue orders within the day. He flipped to another file. And the Ford F-150, we traced the license plate through a dealership. The truck's at a body shop out in the suburbs. The shop owner's a veteran. He bought it from a private broker. Negotiation looks favorably. I pulled my chair closer and began signing the documents. Each page was marked with sticky arrows, and Peterson explained each one succinctly. The management authorization, the temporary legal representative designation, the notice to the South Haven buyer, the order transferring control of the West Loop property, and the form to establish an asset recovery operations account. Then he handed me a thin sheet. This is the internal file label. Your name will be masked under a coded identifier during the initial phase to prevent leaks. When it's time to appear, we'll do it once and decisively. Let's do it that way, I said. I took the pen and signed 3 more times. The click of the ballpoint echoed in the quiet room like a latch snapping shut. Peterson made a call on speakerphone, introduced himself, and cited the key clause. Under state law, a sale conducted by someone lacking the authority is invalid. Our side is prepared to refund the full amount immediately and cover any reasonable incidental costs. His voice was steady, never confrontational. On the other end, the buyer's representative asked a few brief questions about fees and timelines. Peterson laid out a clear schedule, no empty promises, and sent a confirmation email he had already drafted. The call ended in under 10 minutes. You heard that, he said, turning to me. They've agreed to cancel. We'll have the keys back within 10 days. He closed the folder and grabbed his car keys. And now, if you have the time, let's go reclaim the truck. We drove to the mechanic's shop. The rolling door was open, the smell of oil and hot metal thick in the air. The shop owner, a man in his 50s with cropped hair and faint tattoos on his arms, walked over. Peterson gave a brief introduction and handed him a copy of the documents. The man read, looked at me, and asked, "This truck belonged to your husband?" "Yes," I said. "He kept it the way some men keep their father's pocket watch." The man nodded. "I changed the oil, kept it garaged. My price stays the same. I don't profit off someone else's story." He held out the keys. I laid my hand on the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth where Robert's thumb used to rest. A wave rose under my ribs. I swallowed it back, stepped half a pace away, and exhaled. Back at the office, Peterson moved on to West Loop. "We'll issue a management transfer notice to tenants and update the rent collection system. I'll also review all contracts connected to Michael." He opened the database and typed quickly. A list of files appeared. He slowed at one of them. Here someone filed a mortgage document with signs of falsified information. He zoomed in on the signature image. "Brittany?" I looked at the unfamiliar signature beneath Michael's name. The curve was off, the pressure wrong. "Document everything," I said. "But don't contact Michael, not yet." "Of course." He closed the file, added a note for the legal team. "Retrieve originals, cross-check, verify witnesses." His tone dropped to a lower register. "We'll take this step by step, leave nothing out." I left the office before noon. The weekday streets were busy but not crowded. I stopped at a grocery store to pick up a few essentials. At the checkout counter, the cashier complimented my wool scarf and asked where I bought it. "My husband knitted it," I said simply. The words tightened my chest for a moment, then settled, steadying me again. At home, I unpacked the groceries and made a small pot of soup. The phone buzzed nonstop, but I kept it on silent. A neighbor knocked, asked a few polite questions about the weather and my doctor's visit. I smiled lightly, kept the conversation short, leaving no door open for further questions. A quick glance at social media showed that Brittany's profile was gone, the pictures of dinners in Rome or Paris erased completely. I didn't click. Those things were just echoes now. By late afternoon, I brought my bowl of soup to the table and opened my notebook. The first line was already marked in progress. The second was underlined once. The third had a note beside it. "Review lease contracts, appendix section." On the next page, I added another line. "Stay silent with Michael until everything is secured." I set the pen down, feeling a faint ache in my hand. The ache kept me alert. The phone buzzed across the tabletop, sliding an inch like a small fish. A message from Peterson. "South Haven file complete phase 1 done. Awaiting key return schedule." I replied with a single word. "Understood." Then I set the phone down again. Rain was falling hard when I looked at the clock. 9:40. O'Hare Airport stretched out like a long tunnel of light, steam rising from the tile floor and from the coats of people passing by. I stood behind a column, not wanting to be recognized by anyone I knew. Michael appeared at the far end of the hall, dragging a scuffed suitcase with one crooked wheel. His coat was soaked, his old phone flickered once and died, battery gone. He stopped beneath a sign, looking around like a man arriving in a strange city. A bank alert flashed on his screen. "Passed, due payment." He rubbed his face, dialed a number, then dropped the phone back down. Probably still calling Brittany. No one answered. I followed him at a slow distance, close enough to see, far enough not to be heard. Outside, the rain lashed against the bus windows. Michael climbed aboard a shuttle headed downtown. I followed in my old sedan, the wipers beating like a heavy drum. When we reached West Loop, he pulled his suitcase through the lobby, his hair plastered by rain. The building staffer looked up, polite but firm. "Management has changed," she said. "Any overdue balances must be settled before your access card can be reissued. An eviction notice went out last weekend. Please check your mailbox." Michael froze, gripping the suitcase handle. "I already made a payment, most of it." "Not enough and not on time," she replied. "The company requires full resolution within 30 days. We don't have discretion." He nodded once, didn't argue. When he turned back toward the rain, his shoulders sagged as if someone had slipped a sack of sand onto his back. Maybe for the first time, he realized what Brittany had done with his signature. I watched him stand under the awning, tilt his head up into the rain for one brief second, then pull his suitcase toward the train station. I didn't follow. The road ahead was his to choose. Then I turned the car around and drove home. Late that night, the doorbell rang. Michael stood on the porch, coat dripping, the cold smell of rain spilling in with him. His eyes avoided mine. "Mom, could I stay here for a few days?" He swallowed. "Just until I figure things out." I handed him a dry towel and hung his coat on the rack. "Come in, leave the suitcase here. There's hot tea in the kitchen." He pulled out a wooden chair but didn't sit all the way back, as if afraid to take up space. I poured him tea and set the cup in front of him. I didn't ask about Europe. I didn't ask about Brittany. Those questions were broken needles now. I took the pot of chicken soup off the stove, the air filled with the warmth of celery and black pepper. The toast was golden, its surface freckled with melted butter. He looked at the soup, pressing his lips together. I remembered the last time I made it for Robert, after one of his medical checkups, how he ate slowly and said, "Warm hands, steady stomach." I placed the bowl in front of my son, spoon beside the rim. "Eat, then sleep. We'll talk in the morning." "Mom," he started to say something, then stopped. His phone rattled against the table, another debt notice. I met his eyes. "Turn it off. Eat first, warm up." He did, ate spoon by spoon, sniffing softly against the steam. The only sounds were the rain running over the roof and the steady ticking of the clock. When his bowl was empty, I laid a thin blanket over his arm. "Your room's just the same. Fresh sheets on the bed." Michael's room sat at the end of the hall. The old high school jacket still hung on the wall, and a yellowed basketball ticket was taped beside it. He stood in the doorway for a long time before switching on the light, his shadow stretching across the floor. I passed by, resting my hand on the doorframe but not stepping in. "Good night," I said, just loud enough that the wind and rain wouldn't carry it away. Back at my desk, I opened the drawer and took out Robert's second envelope. On the back, written years ago in green ink, were his words, "For when you need to lead our son out of the dark, not to shield him from the rain." I held the envelope in my hands. The paper warmed against my skin like a small coal. I knew the key inside could open a path, money, shortcuts. But shortcuts have a way of bringing people right back where they started. The computer screen blinked with a new email. Subject line from Peterson. Signs of loan document forgery. Possibly Brittany. I opened it. There were photos of signatures, transmission logs, a faintly visible broker's name buried in the middle. Peterson had written, "We can proceed to a formal hearing if you approve." I replied, "Proceed, no contact with Michael." Then shut the laptop. The clock ticked past midnight. I stood, carried the envelope to the small table by the window, and placed it beside the Northern Trust appointment slip. The date field was blank. I picked up a pen and marked a single, small dot in the corner, a private signal for something I would do, but not tonight. I walked quietly down the hall, stopped outside Michael's room, and laid my hand against the wall, feeling the faint warmth from the other side. No one saw the gesture, and I didn't need anyone to. Then I went back to bed, pulled the blanket up high, and listened as the rain softened. In my mind, the arrows on my plan shifted colors from gray to blue. Tonight, the house was finally still. As for tomorrow, let tomorrow come. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains, and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. I set 2 cups on the table. Michael came in, eyes shadowed, hair rumpled from restless sleep. "I have something I want you to do with me today," I said directly. He looked at me, waited for the next sentence, then nodded, avoiding any question with Brittany's name in it. I pointed to the plate of eggs and toast. "Eat, then we'll go." We arrived at Northern Trust while the lobby was still quiet. The clerk checked our IDs, had us sign the ledger, and led us down to the vault. The hallway was silent as a water tank. I took out the key, then handed it to Michael. "You open it." He gripped it tightly, turned it once. The faint click of metal sounded like a breath drawn in. The door slid open. Inside was a velvet-lined box and a thin stack of documents. Michael set the box on the stainless steel table and opened it. Jewelry rested motionless under the light rings, necklaces, bracelets, and a tie clip engraved with Robert's name. The inventory sheet listed each item with its provenance. The total estimated value was around $200,000. A small handwritten note from Robert was clipped on top. "An asset is only worth something when the one holding it understands responsibility." Michael swallowed. "If I sell most of this, I can stop some of the bleeding, the penalties, at least." He flipped through the papers quickly. I pulled out a chair and sat upright. "What's your order of priority?" I asked. He answered without hesitation. "Secured loans first, then high, interest unsecured, then penalty fees. And the legal consequence if you miss a contract with a weekly interest escalation clause?" He paused, then exhaled. "It balloons like a damn tire." "I know." "Good," I said evenly. "I won't object to selling, but you'll draft a repayment schedule with dates, every account, collateral, and penalties clearly listed. No plan, no sale." Michael nodded, accepting the condition. I glanced at the tie clip. "That one?" He picked it up, turned it over the anniversary date, etched small on the back. His hand softened. "That one stays." We visited 2 appraisal offices. The first offered a higher price, but only an internal slip. The second provided a certified valuation, signed and legally backed. Michael chose the second, signed according to state regulations, and kept a copy. I said nothing throughout, just watched him read each clause, line by line. In the end, the proceeds were enough to clear the highest penalties and leave a modest cushion for living expenses. When the bank clerk confirmed the transfer, Michael stood near the window, breathing as if he'd just climbed a long hill. That night, he began working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift at the O'Hare Airport parking lot, old uniform, broken heater in the booth, wrapped in an extra coat. During his break, he opened his old tablet and built a debt spreadsheet. First column, loan name, then type, interest rate, due date, notes on penalties and collateral. At the bottom, he added a row labeled Small Reserve Fund, a modest number, but not zero. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. "Thanks for dinner. I'll cover my weekly share." No emojis. But it was the first time he'd reached out on his own. The next morning, Peterson sent a preliminary report, proof that Brittany had forged Michael's signature, copying it from an old contract. The money trail showed transfers through an intermediary account before disappearing into an offline exchange. I read it all, didn't forward it to Michael. Instead, I sent Peterson several asset documents from the vault purchase dates, receipts, certifications, to include as evidence. "Keep sealed until the hearing," I wrote. He replied, "Understood." Late that night, the kitchen was quiet again. Michael spread his repayment sheet on the table, pointing to the lines. "I've cleared the 2 worst penalties. This week I'm tackling the high-interest loan. I'm negotiating to lower the fees." "And if they enforce the instant interest clause?" I asked. "I've made a small deposit and set a progress schedule. If they refuse, I'll switch to weekly payments with documentation." I nodded. "Next week, you'll give me a detailed expense report with receipts, and you'll contribute a small amount toward household costs. Consider it practice." Michael didn't argue. "Okay. One night this week, I'll do the grocery run, cook, and manage it on a budget." I looked into his eyes, no evasion, no impulse. His effort had shape now, boundaries. After he went to his room, I stayed with my notebook. The arrows of my plan were beginning to line up, fewer detours, clearer lines. I organized the files, preparing for the formal session. Peterson had proposed an agenda: present all evidence, outline the debt resolution plan, and evaluate options for pursuing Brittany legally. I messaged him to confirm the date, asking that his presentation use plain language step by step so Michael could follow without feeling overwhelmed. The next morning, I returned to the bank. I placed Robert's second envelope, the one containing the key that had opened the jewelry box, into a new safe deposit box under my own name. I kept only his note in my wallet. I touched the words, "Understand responsibility," the dry ink scratching softly against my fingertip like a quiet reminder. Outside, beneath the awning, the gray sky was breaking into pale blue. My phone buzzed. A message from Peterson. Meeting invite titled simply but heavily, "The Whole Truth." I opened it, reviewed the attachments once more, then turned off the screen. As I slipped the phone into my pocket, I could feel my heartbeat steady, not because everything was done, but because everything was finally in order. Somewhere down the road, I knew I'd have to open another door for Michael, but not today. Today, he had opened the first one himself. On the third night shift, I stopped by O'Hare on my way home, standing in the dark, watching through the glass booth where Michael worked. The heater inside flickered, and steam fogged half the window. A driver pulled up, voice tense over the parking fee receipt. Michael didn't argue. He asked to rescan the ticket, checked the entry and exit times, printed the discrepancy report, then calmly explained each line. At first, the man's jaw was set tight, but his anger ebbed. He signed the receipt and drove off. I saw Michael exhale, pressing both hands around a paper cup of cold coffee. Steady this time, he'd kept his composure. I turned away before he could notice me. I felt a quiet sense of relief. My son had finally begun to face his mistakes and make amends. Maybe he'd started to turn back, now that the money had run dry. Maybe he'd finally stopped long enough to think about what was right and what was wrong. The next morning, he spread his expense sheet across the kitchen table. The columns were straight this time, the numbers didn't drift. I scanned quickly and marked 2 items with my pen: energy drinks and cell plan. Cut them, I said simply. Water, cheaper plan, and keep a small emergency fund. He nodded, deleted, and re-entered the figures. 4 weeks of self-management, no borrowing ahead, I added. He signed beside the small line I wrote. No pushback. At noon, he had a meeting with one of the more difficult creditors. I didn't go. When he came home, he showed me the meeting record. They had mocked his credit history, and he hadn't defended himself, just slid across the table a weekly payment schedule and a small deposit. At the bottom, a line read, "Conditionally approved upon timely payments," with a shaky but valid signature. "What do you see?" I asked. He replied, "Numbers weigh more than promises." I didn't show it, but I felt a deep pride in that answer. My son had grown up. Early the next week, he missed an extra shift. The next morning, I saw a warning email from his manager in our shared inbox for household documents. Attached was Michael's apology. He'd set the wrong alarm and volunteered to make up the shift. I didn't reply. No pat on the back, no extra scolding. Acknowledgement was enough. When his role reversal dinner came, Michael did the grocery run himself. He came back with beans, chicken, bread, and onions. In the kitchen, I showed him how to organize the fridge, fresh food on top, cooked food below, wipe the counter before turning on the stove. The soup he made was a little bland, but good enough. He washed the pot slowly, dried his hands before touching the fridge handle. The feeling of home drifted back into the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, the hum of the dishwasher. I heard it, the way one recognizes the rhythm of an old heartbeat. That night, Peterson sent over a set of handwriting comparisons, magnified strokes, uneven pressure points, stray loops. Attached was testimony from a broker who had seen Brittany signing on Michael's behalf. His note was brief, sufficient for full presentation. I replied, "Proceed." The desk lamp caught the edge of the paper, the blue ink lines showing sharp and clear, like tree branches through fog. By the weekend, Michael had crossed out several impulse expenses from his list: coffee runs, movie tickets, a pre-order for shoes. He made the first payment to the difficult creditor on time and attached a screenshot as proof. I read it without comment, just marked paid beside the line and wrote the next due date. Across the tabletop, my little checkboxes were starting to form a path. Late that night, he sat across from me and laid out an updated plan. "Next week, I'll clear the rest of the unsecured debt. If I can't negotiate a lower fee, I'll switch to weekly payments to keep the interest from growing." "The emergency fund?" I asked. "Still there," he said, without glancing at the sheet. "And I'm keeping Dad's tie clip in the drawer." I nodded. No more words. Every sentence between us now was stripped of excess. After he went upstairs, I opened my inbox. A new invitation from Peterson. Full evidence presentation, fixed date and time. I placed the phone face down, resting my palm on its back for a while. That day would bring to the conference room a line of true and forged signatures, the flow of money through hidden accounts, and the silence I needed Michael to sit through long enough to hear it all without breaking. I stood and turned off the kitchen light. The rain had stopped, leaving only dry wind outside. On the table, Michael's expense sheet remained open, the on-time box bolded once, and this time his line was straighter than I expected. The hallway outside Peterson's office was as still as a small church. Michael stood staring at the brass nameplate mounted on the oak door, gripping his folder of notes so tightly the edges had begun to curl. I slowed my pace, laid a hand on his arm for a moment, then withdrew. "Breathe," I said softly. He nodded, lips pressed tight. The door opened, and Peterson gestured us in. The conference room was small, the projector already humming. Peterson didn't bother with pleasantries. He clicked the remote, and a diagram appeared: money flowing through intermediary accounts, blue arrows connecting one bank to another, each line annotated with dates and times. He enlarged a photo of two signatures, the M and C from a loan contract, left-hand pressure, an upward pen lift unlike Michael's natural hand. "This," Peterson pointed, "is the genuine signature from your previous employment file, and this is the one from the loan Brittany submitted. Look at the pen stop." Michael leaned forward, silent. Peterson clicked to the next slide: emails between Brittany and a broker. Short sentences, account numbers, commission percentages, no commentary needed. "Preliminary conclusion," Peterson said evenly. "Michael is cleared of liability for most of the fraudulent debt. The authorities have opened a criminal investigation into Brittany. We'll monitor and cooperate as needed." Michael sank back in his chair, exhaling like a valve releasing air. I glanced at his hand. It was still clenched, but the whiteness had faded. Peterson closed the slides and pulled another folder from his briefcase, a dark blue cover embossed with the logo, Harbor Light Holdings, LLC. He set it before Michael, then looked to me. I nodded. "Read the name of the legal owner," I said. Michael turned the first page. His eyes stopped at the bold line, "Evelyn Carter, sole shareholder, controlling authority." He looked up and I didn't look away. "I've been here all along," I said. I just chose silence. Shame rose in his face, hot and visible, like a tide coming in. "All of this is my fault. Mine. Selfishness." It wasn't an apology, just truth, stripped bare. "From now on, no blame," I said, pulling my chair closer to the table. "Only terms." Michael sat upright. I raised one finger. 1. Maintain steady employment for at least 3 consecutive months. No late arrivals, no missed shifts. A second finger. 2. Complete a short course in personal financial management. A third. 3. Once a week, assist with basic paperwork at Peterson's office. You'll see exactly what one bad signature can cause. A fourth. 4. Carry out a small community project connected to the South Haven Shelter Plan. Not to atone for me, but to understand the value of doing something right. Michael swallowed hard. Timeline? Peterson opened his planner. The financial course still has slots this weekend. Office hours Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Community project proposal within 3 weeks. Review on the 4th. The 3-month clock starts today. I won't fund daily expenses directly, I added as Peterson took notes. If you complete each section, I'll cover tuition. The West Loop apartment isn't a privilege. To return, you'll need proof of stable income and a legitimate reason. Michael nodded. Understood. Peterson slid over a 1-page document titled Family Agreement Targets, Deadlines, Signature Lines. Michael took the pen, hesitated for a second, then signed. I signed after him. No handshake. The paper was binding enough. Peterson gave him the first assignment. Reorganize all debt files by origin, interest type, and collateral. Create a glossary. Define terms like subordinate lien, accrued penalty interest, limited power of attorney. Due next week. Michael slipped the papers into his folder, stood a beat before I did, opened the door, then held it for me. A small gesture, but not the same as before. Out in the hallway, neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then Michael stopped. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for giving me a real chance." I felt something drop in my throat, like a stone rolling off a ledge. Tears came, but stayed at the edge of my eyes, not falling. "Let's go home," I said. "Lunch first, then you'll stop by Peterson's office to pick up the digital files." In the car, I kept the radio low. Traffic updates, a quick ad, then silence. Michael looked out the window as buildings slid past. "Mom," he said, "what do you plan to do with the South Haven house?" I kept the wheel straight. "I want to look into converting it into a shelter, not a museum for memories." His face turned slightly toward me, eyes brighter. "I want to help. Help by doing," I said. "Peterson will schedule a meeting with the local board." That afternoon, he registered for the short finance course. I watched from a distance as he filled out each box, never once glancing over for my approval. When we left, he carried a thick packet from Peterson receipts, daily interest charts, complaint forms. Back home, he laid them out on the table, pulled up his old laptop. "Glossary first," he said. I nodded, went to the kitchen to make tea. The scent of black tea spread through the air, softening the rhythm of the keyboard. Michael frowned as he looked up a term, underlined it with a pencil, then typed again. I stood by the doorway, watching him as one might watch someone relearning how to use their own strength. Late that night, he closed the laptop. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll request a shift swap so I can attend my first office session. Swap according to policy," I reminded him. "You'll need confirmation." "I have it." He gathered his papers so neatly it startled me. Before heading upstairs, he paused on the steps. "Mom, I read through the forgery section carefully. I understand why you made me hear it all from the start." "Good," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." When the house grew quiet, I opened my notebook and added a new line beneath the already highlighted tasks. Schedule meeting with Township on converting South Haven property request safety guidelines. Intake process, background checks. I took a photo of the page and sent it to Peterson. His reply came almost instantly. "Monday confirmed. I'll prepare the documentation list." I set the phone down, noticing how steady my heartbeat had become. The road wasn't smooth, but the lines were clearly marked now. On the wall, the photo of Michael as a child on the beach still hung there. This time I looked at it longer not to reminisce, but to compare. The boy holding the kite stared into the lens. The man tonight faced his stack of papers and didn't flinch. I turned off the lights, leaving one small lamp glowing in the kitchen corner. Its warm light clung to the table, to the half-full cup of tea, a quiet period at the end of a long sentence, before the next paragraph begins. Tomorrow morning, Peterson would send the official meeting invite with the local board. I was ready for the hard questions. Why a shelter? Why there? Why now? The rest he would find his own answers. Morning in South Haven was cold and clear. I stood on the porch, listening to the sound of waves brushing against fine sand, clipboard in hand. Michael opened the door, checking the hinges. "The rear emergency exit still jammed," he said. I followed him, flashlight angled under the stairs. We marked items with a felt-tip pen. Add handrails, upgrade the interlinked fire alarm, replace every lock with access-logged electronic ones, install cameras in shared areas, but never in bedrooms or the kitchen. The kitchen needed grease filters, a Class K extinguisher, and non-slip mats. Bedrooms. Compact single beds, internal locks that don't auto-latch, individual smoke detectors. I read aloud the final line. Common area, warm lighting, long table. Bookshelf, no television. Michael frowned. "Why no TV?" "Because we need real conversations, not noise pretending to be company," I said. He nodded, quietly. That afternoon, at the town hall, Peterson presented the application file. He spread out the safety plan and residency rules, background checks for volunteers, entry and exit logs, no open access to outsiders, clear reporting procedures. I handed over the training list: basic first aid, emergency response, emotional de-escalation skills. The safety officer peered over his glasses. "Your fire compliance needs to meet public facility standards. Exits must swing outward, with phosphorescent exit lights, regular drills, written records." I nodded. "We'll comply." He tapped his pen. "And a certified night attendant must be present." Yes. The community hearing took place in a church hall nearby, wooden pews filled with the familiar faces of a small town. An older man stood up, hair silver, voice dry. "How do you guarantee safety? My house is right across the street. I don't want my property value dropping." A woman spoke sharply. "Isn't this just a cover for something else? The internet says your former daughter-in-law was involved in something." I set the microphone down for a beat, met their eyes. "This will be a regulated, supervised, transparent shelter. Nothing hidden. And property values those stay steady when communities stay safe. Helping one another doesn't drive them down." Michael asked to speak. He opened a simple slide deck. Data on similar shelters, incident rates near zero, a 3-step intake process, confidentiality policy, hotline coordination with the local police. He neither bragged nor pleaded, just showed what needed showing. By the end, some nodded, others stayed silent. The chairperson summarized. "Consensus isn't unanimous. We'll need time to observe. Mrs. Carter, update progress every 2 weeks." "Understood," I said. The next morning, the local paper ran a coy headline: "South Haven Shelter Project Altruism or Disguise." The article sidestepped into Brittany, calling her a related party in Chicago. Peterson called immediately. I'm filing a legal response requesting correction for factual errors. Would you like to issue a statement? No, I said. We'll make our budget and standards public. That's enough. So we posted a detailed expense sheet on the website. Safety renovations, training, supply kits, no vague entries. Next to it, we published the shelter's operating standards. No family narratives, no sentimentality, just facts and figures. Let the numbers speak. Within a week, the volunteer list filled fast. A grade school teacher offered to run afternoon tutoring. 2 night shift nurses signed on for medication monitoring. A veteran volunteered for front door duty and evacuation drills. I led the first training: how to say no safely, how to stand in a doorway to open space instead of blocking it, how to write concise, factual reports. Michael handled logistics, created intake forms, a 3-page conduct code, and a shift schedule. Don't turn this into a paperwork jungle, I warned. 1 page that works is better than 10 no one reads. He gave a small smile. Got it. Just as things began to align, the news from overseas landed. Peterson texted briefly. Brittany arrested in France for forged marriage documents. Extradition in process. I stared at the screen, heart rate unchanged. Michael, at his desk, paused a second, then kept typing. Any comment, Mom? No, I said. Not our business. Finish the renovation package before month's end. We went back to the checklist. Fire alarms installed, new locks ordered, anti-mold coating drying. The first safety inspection came fast and hard. The inspector flagged minutia. Exit sign font too small. Extinguishers missing updated certification labels, 1 outlet near the sink needing a waterproof cover. We fixed everything in 2 days. On return, he nodded. First stage pass, awaiting final completion. The volunteer crew clapped each other on the shoulders. Michael opened the supply cabinet, checking emergency kits, blankets, diapers, milk, flashlights, contact log. I adjusted the common area again, added a floor lamp, removed extra decor. This isn't a homestay, I said aloud to no one. It's a place to breathe. Then came the blow from where I least expected. A major donor, the one who'd promised to fund the safety equipment, called through an assistant. Regretfully, we're withdrawing. Reputation risks, media still unsettled. The voice was polite. The meaning wasn't. I looked at the budget sheet. The gap was immediate. Security cameras, high-grade electronic locks, fire, retardant coating gone, all at once. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The sea stretched black and heavy, like thick cloth without folds. Michael came out, carrying 2 glasses of water. How short are we? He asked. I handed him the clipboard. He skimmed it, eyebrows tightening at the line for electronic locks. If we lower the standard, we shoot ourselves in the foot, I said. Then we don't lower it, he replied quickly. Then I trailed off, listening to the surf. In my head, the columns shifted, pressing inward, leaving 1 narrow blank space in the middle, the space you either fill or stop before the door opens. I closed the clipboard and stood. Tomorrow, I said, board meeting. We'll discuss patching the gap with smaller donations or slowing the rollout. As I walked inside, I heard the ping of an email from my pocket. The subject line glowed, reconsidering support with conditions. From an address I didn't recognize. I opened it, then closed it right away. I didn't need to read further. I already knew what kind of conditions those were. Setting the phone on the table, I looked around the freshly painted room walls, still carrying the scent of newness, and wondered, if we refuse the shortcut, do we still have the strength to walk the long road? By morning, I'd know. But tonight, I left that question standing quietly in the dark like an empty chair, waiting for the right person to sit down. The budget gap lay bare like a patch of wall left unpainted. I spread the clipboard across the long table in the common room. The core team sat around it, eyes fixed on the columns of numbers. Michael pointed to the line for electronic locks and secure storage cameras. Short-term loan, 3 months, he said. Reasonable interest, just enough to install everything before winter hits. I shook my head. If the loan comes with conditions, logos plastered all over the house, we lose the purpose. We're not turning this shelter into a billboard. He went quiet, tapping his pen against the table edge. We agreed to postpone all non-essential furnishings, decorative rugs, the old wine rack, a few handsome but useless armchairs, and prioritize absolute safety upgrades first. That afternoon, a sleek email landed in the inbox, a full sponsorship offer for all equipment in exchange for a moving family story, scripted by their PR team. Michael read it, shoulders stiffening. I watched him, said nothing. I saw in his eyes both the timeline and the quiet fear of falling behind schedule. Then I saw him set the phone down, turning the screen face down. "No," he said evenly. "We take the long road." I nodded. Sometimes, maturity is just one clean word. The next day, we chose the hard path transparent community crowdfunding. Michael stood in front of the old laptop's camera, backdrop a freshly painted white wall. He didn't talk about Brittany. He didn't talk about debt. He talked about why a quiet night of safety could save a child's school year, why a good lock was the line between calm and panic. We posted a detailed budget, weekly progress updates, and photos of the renovation open for anyone to come and see. People from town stopped by on weekends. They saw the inspection chart, the rewired cables, the labeled toolboxes. Small envelopes began to fill the donation box. Online transfers of $20, $50, $100 appeared, steady and modest. Not flashy, but relentless. On the third night after launch, the emergency phone rang at 1 a.m. A woman's voice trembled. "Can I come right now?" Behind her, a muffled child's cry. The temporary protocol clicked into motion like a switch. Minimum ID verification, notify local police to file a report, unlock the side gate, escort both mother and child into the prepared safe room. Michael manned the door. The veteran on our team made a perimeter check. The nurse mixed warm milk. I held the baby for a moment, while the mother signed 2 short lines of acknowledgement. Nothing excessive, just enough to protect her and us both. By 3 a.m., the house was quiet again. We wrote the report and added new notes. More emergency kits needed, contact cards, 24/7 hotline list posted inside the cabinet door. Real experience teaches faster than any workshop. Rumors in the neighborhood softened when faced with plain evidence. That morning, the mother and child left with the town's social worker, both smiling faintly. Former critics began bringing blankets and supplies. The elderly woman down the block delivered a bag of homemade cookies. The elementary school principal called to schedule a rotating counseling session. Support trickled in quietly but steadily. Bit by bit, the deficit filled each small donation another brick in place. The final inspection arrived sooner than expected. The inspector laid out his checklist: fire alarms, exit chimes, outward swinging doors, secondary egress routes, evacuation drills. We ran the sirens. Red lights flashed evenly. The volunteer team lined up, opened doors, and led a mock evacuation. A few minor notes. Enlarge the text on the exit map. Add one more sign on the back stairwell. We fixed both before sunset. When the sun touched the edge of the water, the inspector signed the last page. Approved. I held the certificate in my hand dry, steady. Not because I wasn't happy, but because my mind had already moved on to the next phase. Maintenance. Michael stood beside me, scanning the page, smiling with his eyes. "We did it," he said. I pointed to the blue ink stamp. "This is just the beginning." That night's board meeting was short and sharp. Finalize shift rotations for opening week, confirm supply lists, update the quiet intake policy, welcoming newcomers without questions that might scare them. We set the inauguration date and announced the formation of the Harbor Light Foundation, a trust to run the shelter long-term, beyond any one person. Michael was assigned to draft the opening remarks. "Keep it brief," I told him. "No personal backstory, only promises and how to keep them." He nodded. Understood. Late that night, the house was silent. I stepped out onto the porch. The sea lay dark and glassy, the wind soft. I thought about the email titled, "Support Reconsidered with Conditions." I deleted it this afternoon, no hesitation. Inside, on the table, was a list of names, people who'd given $25, $50, $80, small, even numbers steady as footsteps. After a while, I saw Michael turn on the kitchen light, pour water, glance through the window toward the shore. He didn't say a word, just raised his glass toward me from across the room, a silent toast. The next morning, Peterson texted, "Permit published on the public portal. No remaining legal barriers." I replied with one word, "Acknowledged." We framed the permit in simple wood and hung it in the hallway. Everyone who passed paused a second. as if instinctively showing respect for something newly made real. The opening date was set, Saturday, 10 a.m. Attendees would include local officials, volunteers, neighbors, and a few small donors. I chose a ribbon the color of the sea blue, not bright red. Michael handed me his draft speech. 8 sentences, tight. No, I suffered. No, I endured. Just, we commit, we stay transparent, we take responsibility. I crossed out one adjective, added a fixed date for public reports. He smiled and made the edit. The night before the ribbon cutting, I touched the permit again. The blue ink had dried, but it still felt warm. From the yard, the ocean brushed the shore in slow, even strokes. I closed my eyes and heard a deep breath, not of exhaustion, but of release, making room for new air. The hardest part was over. The next hard part would be keeping our promises. In my pocket, the phone buzzed gently, a reminder. Prepare to announce Harbor Light Foundation. I looked down the lit hallway rows of wooden chairs, new locks clicking softly as I turned one to test it. Everything was ready. Now, all that was left was to step outside, cut a thin blue ribbon, and say just enough. No more, no less. The morning of the dedication was clear, the lake wind steady, the sky like a sheet of glass freshly washed. I stood on the porch of the South Haven house, the sea blue ribbon stretched lightly between 2 wooden posts. Small signs dotted the lawn, their lettering neat and plain: common area, counseling room, exit route. The town officials arrived first, dark coats, name badges gleaming. Volunteers set up chairs, checked the fire extinguishers one more time. Neighbors came in clusters, some carrying pies, others holding blankets. No one spoke loudly. The air was warm but measured, like a church service without the bells. Michael stepped up beside me, in a simple shirt and neatly tied tie. He looked at the ribbon, then gave a small nod. When the chairperson invited him to speak, he took the microphone without unfolding his notes. "We open these doors today," he said, "not to tell a sad story, but to make a promise. Here, responsibility comes before emotion. Anyone who steps across this threshold has a chance to begin again, and we're transparent about how we keep our word. The justice we believe in doesn't break people, it teaches them to stand." He paused for half a beat. "Our first public report will be released in 30 days. Applause rose steady, brief, then faded to make room for the work ahead. When it was my turn, I didn't speak about property or fraud. I unfolded a small, 4-fold letter one I'd written to Robert the night before, the handwriting shaky but straight. "Robert," I began softly. "That morning, in the waiting room at Northwestern Medicine, I sat alone, holding the wool scarf you knitted, listening as they called names, and the seat beside me stayed empty. That day I thought I'd shrunk, but you had already left a path, and I followed it here. I didn't bring our son back with tears. I let him relearn how to walk. Today, our house by the sea opens its doors to those still finding their way through the fog. If you can see us now, you'll notice the porch light is warm enough that no one needs to be afraid." I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. A thin silence settled over the yard. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else wiped their eyes with the back of their hand. Peterson stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "Let's sign," he said in the professional tone of a man who has signed countless documents yet still treats each with respect. I signed the charter establishing the Harbor Light Foundation. Beneath my name were the advisory board members, a family doctor, a local school representative, a veteran. Peterson took the role of compliance supervisor, responsible for periodic reports. Michael took operations and transparent fundraising. He said only, "I'll take responsibility, nothing more." When the last pen stopped moving, I heard the faint click of the doorframe inside the house, like a sound confirming a change of state, from a place under repair to a living institution. Evening light fell softly as people dispersed. On the porch, Michael and I sat watching the water shimmer silver. He showed me an email confirmation. He had completed his personal finance management course with a solid final grade. "I've kept every shift for 3 months," he said, "and I want to apply for the nonprofit management program next. I'll start transitioning out of the night shifts, move into grant work and program oversight." I looked at him, the tension in his shoulders gone. "Good," I said. "Start with a vocational program for residents, paid internships, clear contracts. Don't dream it, sign it first, then talk." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I will." That night, the house made the kind of sounds I had been waiting for. Children's laughter in the common room over picture books, the clink of spoons against cups, the soft steps of the night nurse checking the halls, locks clicking gently as they were tested. The on-duty team ran through the checklist, locks secure, alarms functional, resident count verified. The back door latched safely. I stood at the end of the hallway, looking out toward the porch. In my mind, Robert leaned against the railing, chin tilted slightly, his gaze not following me anymore but drifting out toward the sea. Back in the kitchen, I brewed 2 cups of black tea. Michael brought a plate of cookies. We clinked cups lightly. "To the first day," I said, "and to the days ahead," he replied. Out beyond, the lighthouse blinked one calm flash at a time, like the nod of an old friend. I thought of that morning in the hospital waiting room, the chill of the plastic seat, the scent of disinfectant, the hollow feeling of being left behind. I thought of the phone call that broke everything open, the brown envelope, the first time I gripped the wheel of the recovered F-150, my palms burning hot. All of it formed a closed loop. Family, after all, isn't where you hide from storms, it's where you learn to seal the unsafe doors and open the right one. The truest justice is the kind that teaches people to grow so they can keep their balance on their own. Late at night, the wind moved across the porch like an old acquaintance. The sea glittered in small, gentle shards, no longer cold. I dimmed most of the lights, leaving one warm glow in the hallway. Beyond the wall, the house breathed slow and even, alive at last. I closed the door, slipped a hand into my pocket, and felt the folded paper, the letter I'd read that morning. No need to reread it. Every word had already left me and found its place. I whispered, not for anyone to hear, "We've come home." And home, this time, was bright enough that no one had to walk alone. The story you just heard is fiction, but every detail in it is born from something painfully real. Mothers abandoned by their children, wives forced to rebuild themselves from the ashes of trust, and people who turned loss into light. Names and locations have been changed to protect those who might be recognized. We tell this story not to condemn but to remind. Sometimes, justice doesn't live in a courtroom. It begins with one person's courage to stand after being betrayed. If you were Evelyn Carter, would you stay silent or open your own envelope? This story isn't just about a mother reclaiming what was hers, it's about the journey to regain dignity, responsibility, and faith in truth. If you've ever felt yourself walking through that same fog, leave a comment below. If you believe light should be shared, send this video to someone who needs a reason not to give up. And don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story is a reminder that justice may come late, but it always finds its way as long as someone dares to begin. On the final screen, we'll leave you with 2 more stories about truth, forgiveness, and those who rose from their own darkness. I promise you won't be able to look away.